Yeah, well, I think like we probably all sit around, throughout life thinking like, yeah, when you get into a sport, do you ever have that chance to meet, like, somebody that's at the pinnacle? When I played basketball, it was Michael Jordan. So it's one of these things where you always hope that would happen. And from my end, meeting a cave diver who had already explored caves down to 219 meters, 220 meters, and then, being of that kind of ilk of diving, just the idea of listening to him speak was one thing. But then, of course, because, I never settle for like, hey, let's go see the guy. And so I think with your help specifically, I was able to pull that together. And I think took out a small group of folks who were able to get a dive in with Harry. And I mean, that was unreal.
It's episode 9 of Dive In the Podcast with special guest Amit Parasram. Welcome to Dive In the Podcast, your favorite podcast about all types of diving, scuba, tech, freediving, and more. We cover it all. Every week on Monday, we post new episodes filled with diving news, interesting dive topics, environmentalism, and much more. This week, we look at another instructor's journey. Amit Parasram joined us for an interview where he talked about growing up in the Caribbean and getting hooked on diving in cold water. Before that, though, we'll talk about lonely aquarium fish. In our Think Blue segment, Nick Winkler talks about interacting with the aquatic environment. Nick Fisher talks to us about dry suits. We'll have a book recommendation, April has a safety tip, and we'll learn who we should follow on social media next. Hi, I'm your host, Justin, and joined with me, as always, first up tonight, Nick Winkler. How are you tonight?
Pretty good. How you guys doing?
Pretty well myself. Nick Fisher, how about you, sir?
Doing great tonight, Justin. Thanks.
Thanks for being here. And April, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back this week. I missed you guys last week.
Oh, we missed you too. You're no Will, but Will's no April.
Well, there's something to be said about that, I suppose.
How did the house signing go? Are you currently in the house now?
No, I'm still at Dean's father's house, but we get it next Friday, so a week from tomorrow.
That's exciting.
Oh, that is
Nice.
awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. Couch shopping.
You know what else is exciting?
What?
Or at least not exciting. The fish at the Cairns Aquarium are missing human interaction.
That's not exciting.
Yeah, you're right. That was terrible. That was a terrible toss. I'm sorry to everyone, including the fish.
It is really sad.
Yeah,
So
it
this is why they're missing human interaction.
Yeah, because of terrible tosses in
Just getting
podcasts.
roasted on podcasts.
Yeah. The staff noticed that the fish were like looking for people, and some of them were not even eating. So the aquarium hired a third diver to increase the human interaction. The article title is literally "Aquarium hires diver to cuddle sharks."
I'm sad.
Where do I apply for that job?
I dove once in the shark reef tank in the aquarium at the Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, which was quite an experience because you have to wear chainmail. But these little guys, I always call them white tip sharks, but those are the pelagic ones. So I don't actually think they're white tips. But they're these little guys. They're maybe like 3 or 4 feet at max length. But if you sit on the sand at the bottom, they literally come up to you and like shoulder you out of the way if sharks had shoulders.
Oh.
Like, this is my spot. Move. And then they just like look up at you like, why in my spot, man? This is my spot. So I totally see that like the sharks missing people and interaction.
No, they're so used to seeing people, and now there's nobody. So.
Oh yeah, when
Sad.
I did some work for the Assiniboine Bark Zoo in Winnipeg. I was one of the divers that would clean the polar bear and the seal tanks. There's no polar bears in the enclosure when we're in there cleaning, but
Good move.
which is terrifying when you're the tender. Which I was usually the tender for that dive, and then we do a second dive in the seal tank. And I would always have like a few glances over my shoulder once or twice to see if there's any bears coming out of the thing. The seals, when they are in the water, they usually have this little routine of they'll do like a little lap and then they swim kind of upside down at the spectators and go back around. I can only imagine that, if there was no people, there was nothing to see, it was just the same enclosure, nothing new, it'd get really old. So I really feel for those cairns fish that are lonely.
Yeah, it's aquariums can be like a double-edged sword. Just the fact of their existence. But yeah, it's kind of sad. But hey, maybe there'll be people going back to aquariums soon.
I'll
for sure cuddle a shark.
I volunteer to cuddle a shark too. I'll do
Shark
it.
cuddling. We'll fly in an emergency mission of Diving the Podcast hosts to cuddle sharks in Australia.
Yeah.
Live from Cairns Aquarium.
I think we're going to have to throw together a quick GoFundMe. I think we can get this to happen.
That would be awesome.
I think that's essential, right? Like all non-essential travel is banned, but I think that should definitely be essential.
Our fishy friends need us.
Yeah. And speaking of fishy friends, earlier this week we talked to Amit Parasram. He is a instructor for Torpedo Rays, and he's a super nice guy. I really enjoyed talking to him, and let's listen to that interview now.
Hey everyone, my name's Amit Parasram, and I'm a PADI scuba instructor, side mount diver, and overall dive enthusiast, I guess, would be the quickest way to introduce myself.
Well, thank you for joining us. I want to start off by talking about your history. You grew up on a lush Caribbean island. Is that where you made your initial connection with water?
I would probably say so. I mean, like in the end, it certainly is better than the coastline that we have here. I mean, I laughingly acknowledge that we have coastline but no beaches. I think having come from a Caribbean country, and if you've ever been to Tobago at all, seeing what our Pigeon Point beach looks like in comparison to what we would call a beach here, I would say definitively it started there. Started swimming at a young age. My parents always had us involved in some sort of water activity, so it certainly has progressed from there.
Well, let's assume somebody hasn't been to or know much about Tobago. Can you kind of give us a mental image of what those beaches are like there and swimming there as a kid?
Yeah, well, you know what? That probably the best thing I can give in terms of that would be if you imagine the white sands and turquoise waters that you see in pretty well every postcard. That would more or less summarize what Pigeon Point Beach looks like, and it's one of the most famous beaches there. Tobago as well, probably for older viewers who might have seen like the original Robinson Crusoe movies. They were actually filmed off of one of the beaches in Tobago, so it's that level of kind of lush tropical paradise. One of those islands that was one of the most fought over islands back in the days of colonialism between the Spanish, the British, and the French. And so it's got a long history of what people would consider to be your traditional tropical island paradise. So waters where you could walk out for probably 300 meters before you're past your waist overly much, and just bath water.
But you didn't learn to dive while you were there.
Yeah. So yeah, as far as diving is concerned, I mean, it had always been like an interest. I grew up as a kid that more or less lived vicariously through National Geographic. So, I think I still have a collection of a few hundred magazines downstairs and videos that I'm passing on to my daughter now. But so I've always been interested in diving from that part. I started off in my university life as started in biology, ended up in psychology, and somehow doing what I do now. So it's quite the interesting path. But I never did get to dive while I was in Trinidad. Primarily because of the cost of diving. So even as a person here in Canada, that was always something that I was interested in doing, but being in a family with a single income and 4 kids, that was definitely not an option.
Right. So tell me about your first experiences diving.
Well, so I think the first time was at a resort in a swimming pool, to be perfectly honest. It was one of those, hey man, come and let me just show you what this thing is about, like at a tropical island, right? So, I went over and tried it out because I'd always wanted to do it, and I thought, wow, this is pretty neat. And it kind of cascaded quickly, like, the standard kind of entry level, go do some snorkeling here and there. And then I was in the Bahamas one year, I forget when, maybe like in the 2013 or 14, and it was where the UNESCO divers are located. And so I had gone in to speak to one of the folks there about going on their shark dive, saying, like, hey, I mean, I've tried the scuba diving thing out. It's great. And, much to my surprise, the guy was very, very professional and said, it's great that you might want to do that, but we're not taking a Discover scuba guy out to throw you in the water with a bunch of sharks. So that was when I got told very kindly, go back home or register for a course. and learn to scuba dive, and we'd be happy to feed you to the sharks. And so that was kind of the tipping point for me, because at that point in my life, I kind of had the resources that were required to learn to dive, and then I had the motivation. So that's what really got me. I guess that was a tipping point where I said, well, you know what? I'm tired of coming down to these places and seeing these awesome things in the Caribbean and not being able to go check them out. And so I came back and signed up for a course right away.
And what did you think about the stark reality of diving in Nova Scotia versus what you were thinking about down there?
Well, all right. So I'm going to be fair in saying that when I first signed up, my intention was 100%. I have no interest in diving in Nova Scotia. That was basically what it was. It was I'm going to start diving just for the purposes of diving when I go away and travel. And so I'd registered for a course. It didn't run until September. That was through Torpedo Rays with my first dive instructor, Randy Inkpen, who I think if anybody's been diving here for a while would know about. He's probably taught a good amount of the instructors who teach around here now too. And so we went out in September, I think it was, and the water was gorgeous. So I remember being in the water when we made it to the ocean component and thought, okay, this is doable. If I'm here and this is what it's going to be like, I could probably dive maybe in the summer.
maybe just in the summer. So you got started, but when did the thing start to pick up steam? Was that around when you were doing your advanced course?
Yeah, I would say so. So I think I'm one of these guys where I would say I'm pretty persistent, and so I always look for information. So I'm always trying to figure out like what's the best way to do a thing. And I was at the shop hanging around. I appreciate not being kicked out the number of times that I was loitering there asking, probably stupid questions of a new diver. And actually, I think one of the guys there, Joe McNeil, was an instructor, and him and Nick Jarrett kind of took pity on me and figured like, all right, well, let's see, this guy's always here. Let's just take him diving with us. And so Joe was really kind and said, why don't you just come out with me? And I think that was the big turning point for starting to like diving. So another instructor at the shop had lent me a dry suit in December. That's when I realized, like, hey, this is actually something I could do here all year round, and it would be tolerable, and it actually can be pleasant. And so at that point, after making a relatively large purchase, Joe had said, like, come dive with me and I'll show you what it's like to get out in Nova Scotia. And that really, for me, kind of set the stage for pushing hard. Like, it was a difference between swimming around, stirring up silt on the bottom and thinking that you were diving versus you watch these guys in the water and they were kind of like just hovering above you, looking down, probably thinking, oh, dear God, what did we get ourselves into with this clown? And then, but they pushed through that, like, I mean, and they pushed me to say, like, hey, you're doing well, but you can do better. And they always push that kind of envelope to say, like, don't settle for diving like this. You should try to dive at this level. Right. And I think progressively it just kind of, my passion for it became more and more attracted to those technical aspects that you get to as you kind of master your buoyancy skills and what have you.
And that culminated on some, say, rough diving maybe in your advanced course?
Yeah. That was a great story in relation to that, actually. We went out to Hebridean Park, and Joe, Nick, and I were basically doing that course. And I remember calling Joe and saying, Joe, it's looking a bit rough. I don't know what you think, if we should do it here. And his response was just basically, well, you're an advanced diver now, or you're trying to be. You make a decision. If you'd go diving, I'll go diving. If you don't want to go diving, we won't go diving. And I thought, well, I'd go. We got in the water, and it had stirred up quite a lot of that really fine red, seaweed. And I think the visibility was about 3.5 feet. So if I extended my arm out in front of me with white gloves on, I couldn't see them. But we pushed through. Joe made me do my mid-water ascents and holding safety stops and doing search patterns and what have you all underwater, which effectively was a blind incident. And I remember the water being rough enough when we were done with all of that I was swimming towards the ladder. There's a metal ladder there attached to the dock. And it took me the better part of 10 minutes to swim about 5 feet because of the surge in and out. And by the time Nick and I had gotten out of the water, we were both seasick. So we were just more or less leaned over thinking that we were going to throw up on the dock. water inside, even the surge inside that we were dealing with while we were underwater, was bad enough that it ripped off Nick's $300 Hollis reel, and that's now been claimed by the ocean. So it was a trial by fire, advanced open water. But I guess I couldn't have been safer. I was there with two instructors to one student ratio. I don't expect that it would get much better than that.
Yeah, that's pretty good ratios for a bad, for a rough dive, challenging dive.
Yeah. The coolest part, I think, at the end of that was they both kind of looked over, and Joe said, "Well, if there was any doubt now whether we would dive with you, I think it's a safe bet that we'd say we'd dive with you just about anywhere." So that was kind of like, despite having gone through all that and thinking like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Coming out and getting that sort of nudge forward from the instructor was a big deal too, right? Just to kind of put you back in perspective.
Exactly. So, so that happened. You progressed through more training, dive master eventually, instructor eventually. But there's one thing that sticks out in my head that's pretty unique, and that was dive with a bit of a celebrity. We did a charter. Well, I didn't do a charter, but you guys did a charter with somebody. Why don't you tell me about that?
Yeah, well, I think like we probably all sit around and, throughout life thinking like, yeah, when you get into a sport, do you ever have that chance to meet like, somebody that's at the pinnacle? When I played basketball, it was Michael Jordan. So it was one of these things where you always hoped that would happen. And just randomly, actually, one of my good dive buddies, I think we have logged probably the most dives together, as Jeff Harding had just shot me a text and said, "Hey, do you want to go to this conference? There's a public talk by Dr. Richard Harris or Harry Harris." And so initially, of course, aside from my head exploding component, I was like, oh, hell yes, we absolutely have to do that. And so just in the event that there's strangely some listener who doesn't know who Harry Harris is, the Thai cave rescue that recently went through, he was the anesthetist that had gone in to help out with that cave rescue, and he was in charge of sort of planning the exfil for the kids and then putting them all to sleep via ketamine dosages and then diving them out with another team of divers. So from my end, meeting a cave diver who had already explored caves down to 219 meters, 220 meters, and then, being of that kind of ilk of diving, just the idea of listening to him speak was one thing. But then, of course, because, I never settle for like, hey, let's go see the guy. My first response to Jeff was like, hey, you happen to work at the hospital that's hosting this conference. Why don't you send a note to the organizer, and I'll find out from the shop at Torpedo Rays whether or not we can book a short notice charter and take him out. And so I think with your help specifically, I was able to pull that together, and I think took out a small group of folks who were able to get a dive in with Harry. And that was unreal.
Yeah, it's neat to be able to do something like that, and especially with just all the stars aligning and working towards that. Did he kind of put you on path or gave you some direction for your future of diving, right?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because I think like things kind of happen for a reason to a degree, right? I just recently that year come back from a liveaboard dive trip. I was away in the Bahamas for a while on one of the Blackbeard's cruises that we put on. And then had spent a week in Cozumel diving on the reef there in Cozumel, and had the benefit of doing a few kind of like swim through cavern type dives. One of them in particular, Devil's Throat, was quite a lot of fun. That kind of jumps in at 70 feet, pops out at 130 feet, and it's through a series of swim throughs. And I really had enjoyed that. And so I was talking to Harry a bit about this idea, and had said like, look, I'm trying to get out of just the standard stuff, and I was interested in cave diving and what, kind of where did you go or what would you recommend for that? And, it was relatively funny because he just kind of looked at me and said, oh, yeah, why don't you just go down to Florida and someone will certify you up? And to that, I kind of responded, well, not knowing particularly so, but I'm not interested in a place that's just going to certify me for the sake of certifying me. I'd rather go learn to dive with somebody who would look at me and say, you know what, bud, you're just not cut out for this, and maybe find something else. And so he had really, he was really kind about it. There's definitely one thing about him. He's a very humble guy. and would never make you feel like like you weren't a good diver.
Right.
So he said, well, why don't we chat a bit about it when we get back from the SAG tour? And so when we did, I mean, I had the pleasure of driving him up and back to the SAG, so that gave me a few hours in the car chatting with him. And so we ended up doing a couple of small little penetrations into the wreck, and coming out of that, he came back up, and then on the way home, he said, well, it looks like you can dive. And coming from a guy who strapped on a bunch of board equipment in a configuration he hadn't dove in years and fell off the back of a boat in the Atlantic, he was still the best diver of the group that went with us. So having him kind of give you the check mark of like, oh, it looks like you can dive, I was pretty stoked at that idea.
Right.
And he said, look, if you're interested, I'll refer you to a friend of mine who he referred to as the guy that he goes to see when he needs to square his, we'll say, crap away. So when he has a problem and he can't figure out what's going on, he said, like, this is the guy I go see because he's really that good. And so that's when he kind of made an introduction to Brian Kaycock with me. And so we were hoping, or I guess I was hoping, that I'd be there this year with Brian, but it would seem that our pandemic has decided against that.
That's unfortunate, but it's an interesting path to be on, and you're a side mount diver, and so that adds a whole nother level of challenges, I think, to it, or maybe it gives you a leg up going into cave diving.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, in looking at it, I guess it depends on the kind of caves you're going into. So, I mean, I can tell you, I dive side mount pretty well everywhere that I can. And I don't really see it as a limiting factor. I think a lot of folks see it as a limiting factor, and that, it's easier to don tanks here, there, or wherever. But I think if you take the time to, really square yourself away in terms of your equipment configuration, and you practice the things that you should be practicing for donning and doffing gear, there's actually no reason why you can't be a side mount diver that's more efficient at getting in and out of the water than, say, a back mount diver might be, for a number of different reasons. And as it pertains to cave, as an example, like, it speaks for itself. It's more streamlined. It's going to get you into tighter restrictions. And as it pertains to Brian, as the example, he's very clear about stating that, if you are to do a cave course with him, you're required to do it in side mount. He won't teach it in any other configuration because of the nature of the caves in Abaco. So,
right.
So yeah, it certainly, from my standpoint, is a huge benefit to have already been, a cave diver for a few years, or sorry, not cave diver, a side mount diver for a few years as I move towards trying to be a cave diver. Whether I ever make it there or not, I guess we'll see, right? But it's always good to have goals.
Well, I mean, speaking of goals, then where's Amit in 5 or 10 years from now, diving superstar?
Well, you know what? I would say hopefully wherever I am in 5 or 6 years from now, hopefully I won't have a head fat enough to think that I'm any kind of a diving superstar, and I'll be able to sit back and say, wow, I'm spending every day that I can trying to learn something new. Because if it's one thing I definitely learned, having spoken to guys who are at that level of, say, like a Harry, where I could dive potentially for the rest of my life and never make it there, just because I don't have the ability to dive as much, as often, and with the kind of people that they dive with. So I think humility is a big thing. So I guess for me, it would be more a question of, hopefully I would have made it through a cave course by then and had a few dives under my belt. And hopefully I would be successful, and Brian doesn't boot me out of the course and say, bud, you're just not cut out for this. But I think ultimately 5 years from now, I just hope that I'm a diver that's still loving diving as much as I do, and loving teaching as much as I do. And that recognizes that I really don't know a whole lot, and there's a hell of a lot more that I can learn.
Well, there's one thing I believe in is always continue learning all the time. I take classes, and there's always more to learn. So that's really important for sure. But I think that about wraps it up. But I want to say thank you, Amit, for sharing your story with us. This is a neat story, and gives some neat insight. And I think we can have you back again sometime and talk about some more things.
Yeah, anytime. I mean, anytime you want to chat side mount diving, I'm definitely more than interested in chatting about that. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you guys, in this event over social media, I guess, as opposed to in person. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and yeah, hopefully I can kind of keep the passion going with the diving.
Yeah, it's a pretty good interview. I thought what kind of struck me too is, how when he talked about not being able to dive when he was growing up and stuff, because it just was something that wasn't affordable. Mm-hmm. Diving is still, the sport that's not attainable for a lot of people. But also, like, how he was talking about, I think he was saying somebody lent him a dry suit in the winter for the first time so he could go diving. And that's kind of, and also his interactions with, making his first, real diving buddies that kind of like took him in and took him diving. That just kind of speaks to like the community and what I think also what it takes for people to stay in diving. You can go do a open water course, but if you don't have that network, if you don't have people to go diving with, the fact that it's expensive, that you have to invest in all the gear, and then unless you're included in a community, it's easy to lose interest. So that was actually really nice to hear.
Oh, for sure. There's a group that come through the dive shop. One of our DMTs is part of that group, and I think they still go diving together. Like, they were in their open water together, and then they like went all the way through, I guess, or he went all the way through. But they still go diving like weekly. So like that's a perfect example of like a really good group that still goes out.
Mm-hmm. But overall, I find like just in general, like just from experience, I find diver retention after the open water course is generally really, really low. And I'm not just talking about any particular area, right?
No, yeah, that's a problem for dive shops worldwide, and you can't expect every dive shop member, like staff member, to take every diver under their wing and take them out. So you have to try to provide some other activities to help people, group up and do all that stuff, like the Sea Wolves, like the Seafoxes, the two local, probably most prominent local dive clubs in Halifax here. But also you've got to, convince people to actually even take the first step with those. So that's an interesting thing. Maybe people listening to this will hear it and, want to go out. Speaking of going out, Nick, you want to talk about your Think Blue segment for today?
Sure. Today I want to kind of talk about the popular phrase, leave nothing but bubbles, kill nothing but time. It's a no-trace principle that's been applied to scuba diving. No-trace principles are generally, applied to things like hiking, or that's where most people are common with them. Mm-hmm. It's where you go into a place and you don't really take anything out of it. Maybe footprints. It's what you leave behind, and you take pictures, but you're not really removing anything from the environment. And kind of same thing applies to scuba diving or freediving, or just, for any ocean enthusiast. And I think actually really that phrase that's been standing around for a long time should probably read, take nothing but trash, leave nothing but bubbles, because there's so much trash in the ocean these days. But some of the things that divers can do is not remove marine life from the ocean. I mean, that sounds pretty obvious, but it happens a lot more than you think. So people taking bits of reef or breaking off a coral of a reef for a souvenir. If you're traveling, generally any souvenir that's made from a marine product, shells, corals, animals, or some jewelry made from turtle shells, generally there's no way to ensure that that's like even sustainable or harvested in a responsible way. And actually, in a lot of cases, some of those products are actually illegal to trade or transport on international regulations. So then you as a visitor are potentially liable for, if you get caught bringing in something you shouldn't be in your home country. So that's not a whole lot of fun. Don't remove artifacts from wrecks. I feel that could be like a whole other topics, a whole other topic on its own. But wrecks are important. Artificial reefs and structures for marine organisms. So, if you are removing things from wreck, you're altering that environment that's potentially been built up. So it's generally best practice to leave wrecks as marine habitats, but also for other divers to enjoy. Things you can do, you can call out a dive guide or a dive operator for irresponsible practices. So sometimes you go somewhere and, the dive guide is like poking a pufferfish to make it blow up, just to kind of show a particular animal behavior, but that's really irresponsible. Or if you're, diving with somebody and they're anchoring, on a seabed that's sensitive that you shouldn't anchor on. So you can call out people for that. As divers, you can set examples for your fellow divers, especially for new divers. Take photos. That's a really cool thing to do. You don't have to, you can take something with you without taking something with you. And lastly, there's so much trash kicking around the oceans these days. If you can take it out in a safe way without, having to lift something that's heavy or dangerous or something that's going to cut you, you can put in your BCD pocket, take it out with you. So think blue, take nothing but trash, leave nothing but bubbles, and kill nothing but time.
All super
good
legit points.
Oh, yeah.
I can think in my mind within a couple of moments of you saying them. Literally every one of those bullet points you just went through, I've seen, from the dive guide blowing up the puffer fish to the to people taking stuff off of reefs, to when I was in Hawaii, them like threatening you that some Hawaiian god was going to kill you and curse your family if you took sand off the beach. To like they're hardcore when you go to Hawaii.
Well, in some cultures, right? In some cultures, the ocean, has significant meaning for indigenous people, right? So
For
that
sure.
also respecting cultural norms kind of goes with that same ethic, I would say.
Yeah.
Similarly, like there's other areas of the world where, it's needs to be changed, but like kind of messing with wildlife is the norm. Like I've definitely been on dive boats with groups from Canada in Mexico, where the dive guides are used to, a certain type of diver that want to see, people riding sea turtles and like sticking GoPro cameras into holes with nurse sharks. And it took one dive with this guide that was just used to this certain type of diver. I'm not going to just name a nationality, but I think we know. That want to see that sort of stuff, that we say like, no, like that we are not going to tip you more, we're not going to pay you more because you start messing with wildlife. Like this is not what we're here for. And I think that's just a norm that needs to be broken.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where divers can vote with their money, right? They'll be like, okay, I'm not, if that's the way you're operating, I'm just going to go with somebody else.
And I think the first step is just saying like, no, this isn't what I want to see. So like, don't mess with the sea turtles. Don't ride sea turtles. Don't, shove a GoPro in a nurse shark. Because that's not how we're going to be happy here.
Yeah. I do think to the defense of some of those places, not really defending those actions, but a lot of places have changed and grown up over the last, I haven't been diving forever, but been doing dive travel now for at least the last decade. And, when I started traveling, the stuff that people would do is just ridiculous. And now they're like, you look at a fish too closely and you've got somebody swimming over and tapping you on the head with a stick or something. It's so I think it's getting better, and protected marine parks and all that stuff are growing, and you're getting entire islands worth of protected marine areas and all that kind of stuff. So that's really cool. Hope for the future, but definitely the trash thing. I literally find piece of trash every dive I go on, and it's small, big, whatever. I know I do enough dives. I'm making a difference by just taking a single piece of trash out every dive.
Yep. And that's something easy to do, right? You don't need special equipment. You can do it anytime. Take it with you. Trash it at the... And I would say if you're picking up trash at a dive site, take it home with you and throw it in your trash at home. Because often it's garbage cans like at public beaches or public parks aren't like cleaned out regularly. So that trash can overflow and right back up
into the ocean. Yeah, for sure.
And you can adopt a dive site and log all that stuff at Dive Against Debris.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Really it's going to be my next segment.
Ah, well, hints at the future.
Intro, foreshadowing.
No, sorry, there's no editing in podcasts. We can't cut anything out.
Never. This is live.
Everything we say is on,
except that
file forever.
Everything's on file forever.
Yes.
All right.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything's this podcast I'm pretty sure is backed up in the U.S. Library of Congress because I'm an American citizen, so I'm fairly certain.
2 nights ago,
the Obama Library or Museum, whatever it's called.
The Seafoxes have been doing weekly presentations since COVID started on different things. So this week was my turn, and I did a present. I said I have nothing to present because I haven't done anything that's fun. And they They said, do a presentation on like your journey, your scuba journey. And I was like, okay, I feel like that's makes me seem like a narcissist or something, but okay, I'll like talk about myself for an hour. Um, anyways, so I did, and they recorded it. And after I was like, actually, don't publish that anywhere because I like don't need this nonsense like posted for anyone to see. Like me rambling about myself for an hour. Yeah, that can that for those who got to see it can have it, but that doesn't need to be public.
Everything's public these days.
I know. After I was just like, oh god, this should not be like available to anyone.
I'm just waiting for the scandal a year from now where Zoom has actually recorded every single thing that's ever been done. It's hidden away on a server and then
So
it
bad.
leaks.
Yeah. Some Russian hackers are going to break into Zoom servers and get every piece of video recorded. It's going to be ridiculous.
Oh.
Well, Nick Fisher, Mr. Finger Guns, you want to tell us about some dry suits?
I absolutely want to talk about dry suits. So this week we're doing another product review. I wanted to take a different spin on it, though. I figured that talking about a particular brand of dry suit would be, a little bit dry. Haha, see what I did there? That's my joke. There'll be more. But there's so many different types of dry suits. There's a lot of different, really good makes, different styles, but just getting a dry suit in general. So in my experience from working in dive shops over the years, dry suits are one of the most asked about pieces of equipment, besides mast snorkel fins and regulators and stuff like that. Dry suits are probably like right up there with them. And diving in Canada, they're almost a must. And the question that I get asked most frequently when talking about and giving my dry suit spiel is it really worth the investment? Because you're going to be dropping a little bit of money on a dry suit if you decide to make that decision. So to any listeners out there that are wondering if it's really worth the money, I would say that it's absolutely worth the price tag cost. And there's a lot of different uses for a dry suit outside of just your standard Canadian ice dive. So what I found from diving in a dry suit was just how easy it is to go for a dive pretty much anywhere. And it's super convenient. There's a story that I was told, shortly after starting it at Torpedo Rays of a diver that would, in the summer, just after work, he had his own tanks. They had to be in the trunk of his car. And he would roll up to a dive site at the end of the day after work, jump in his dry suit, like out of his work clothes, and then go for a dive. After he's done his dive with his dive buddy, he'd jump out, unzip, pack away his dry suit, get back in the car and go home. You can't really think of anything much easier than just hopping in a dry suit, going for a dive, and then, hopping out and you're ready to go. There's no hassle of the bulky 2-piece 7mm wetsuit having to dry off after a dive before heading home. Another, great feature of getting a dry suit is just how versatile they are. If you're going ice diving, just throw on a thicker undergarment. Going for ice dive and you have a ton of cash on hand, get some argon. Inflate your dry suit with some argon to keep you nice and warm. If you like diving but aren't, super pumped on getting all that wet, if those people actually exist, you just wear something lighter underneath your dry suit in the summer to keep yourself, warm. And then, there you go. There's not a lot of limitations when you're diving dry. You can dive year round. What do you guys think? Are they really worth it?
I love my dry suit. I think it's worth every penny. I'm one of those people who I dive dry in the summer and I just go no hood and no gloves. But exactly what you're saying, literally just being dry is so nice. Sometimes I'll dive in the summer with just shorts and a tank top under my dry suit.
Yeah.
And then you get out, your clothes are still on. You don't have to awkwardly get changed in a towel by your car. And That's amazing. No, I think I bought my dry suit really, really early on. It was like a total fluke. Basically, we ordered a dry suit for someone and it was too small for them. So it was like, hey, you can buy this dry suit or we have to send it back, which is going to cost us like a ton of money. So I ended up buying it. And I think my 7th dive ever was in a dry suit, and the dry suit that I still own to this day. So, yeah, I would tell anybody, like, your dry suit is worth every penny. Just the convenience and the comfort is so worth it.
Absolutely. What do you guys think?
I definitely think they're worth it in cold water. I don't know if I would agree with your assessment. They're just less bulky, less easy. That's coming from like a tropical diving perspective. I still, even though I've done a lot of dry suit diving, I still feel they're quite a hassle to put on. Yeah, maybe compared to 2-piece 7mm, but I think they're, it's a lot more equipment. You got to have a lot more extra weight and, potentially even ankle weights, and you got to put on your dive gloves if you got those on. So I mean, that's just the reality of like diving in cold water, right? But I don't know if I agree with the assessment. They're just easier to put on.
I have seen cave divers that are down south that do wear dry suits, just without like the hood and gloves and stuff like that.
Without naming any friends, my first dry suit, I sold it to a friend of mine who dives in the Caribbean. Yeah, so not
so it
cave
happens.
diving. Yeah,
it's there.
Yeah.
I've seen diving in Mexico. Like, I think I would have preferred to have my dry suit, to be honest, and just worn less undergarments. Like, I find I have the Aqualung Fusion Fit, and like I just find it so much more comfortable and so much more easy to take on and off than a wetsuit. Like, when I was in Mexico, I was diving my 5mm, and I think putting on my 5mm is way more effort than slipping on my dry suit. So even I think when I was in Mexico, I probably would have preferred to be in my dry suit.
Yeah, I've done a lot of diving in like varying temperature water zones. So I've done a lot of diving in like unbelievably warm lakes, like Lake Mead outside of Las Vegas, where I'm from. Water temperature like 90 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface. Like, you jump in and it's hot. It's not refreshing.
Jesus.
That's Nevada, though, right?
That sounds awful, actually. Like
5 hours away, you're in Southern California. Water drops down to, well, depending on where you're at, anywhere from like 50 to 70 degrees during the summer. It's a weird big range, but like it changes. But we used to do these 3 tank dives on one day. We'd drive out, stay the night, Friday night, dive 3 dives on Saturday. I would dive a 5mm semi-dry. First dive was great. Second dive was great. Third dive was the worst of my life every trip. And
that's such a steep downgrade.
That's because you had lunch and then you had to put your suit back on.
Oh, yeah, that's a killer.
Yeah, and if I had a dry suit, you know how easy that would have been? I would have loved life. But that being said, here, I have a 5mm, not semi-dry, not nothing, and I try to wear that every chance I get during the summer. Not for super deep dives or anything, but just those puttering around Paddy's Head, Fox Point Beach, treasure hunt, whatever. I'll wear that 5mm all day long. And of course, my freediving suit is a wetsuit because you don't freedive in a dry suit, and I wear that year round. So I kind of I like them, but I'm not. It's all or nothing
now, because like every year at the treasure hunt I wear my 3mm suit, but I feel like it's just so I can brag and say I wore it.
Right. It's a rite of passage to drive the treasure hunt. We have for anyone who's not familiar with it, we have a big scavenger hunt where you go in the water and now you look for scallop shells, and you bring your scallop shell back and you get entered in a prize draw. And it's Canada, right? So it can be chilly. It's at the end of the season. The water's usually pretty warm, but it's not always warm. And depending on how many hurricanes we've had and whatever, And it's kind of a rite of passage. You see all these people gearing up in their dry suits and their 2-piece 7 mils, and then you'll see someone like April or some random person. They're like, do in my shorty, just gonna go hop in the water.
Yeah, exactly.
or the one dude in his Speedo.
The next treasure hunt we do, I need to bring my bear shorty from like the 70s that has like a V-neck and is bright orange.
Definitely.
I love pulling that thing out for the confined water courses.
There will be some dudes with the antique scuba gear that dive every year at the treasure hunt with some double hose regulators that will definitely be wanting to talk to you when you roll up in that wetsuit.
Mm-hmm.
Planning my treasure hunt outfit right now.
Perfect. Speaking of some older equipment, Nick has a book recommendation for us.
So this book recommendation is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. I know that Amit wanted me to do the book by Dr. Harris as a book review, but I'm going to get my hands
that was too easy
and read it. Yeah, so we'll follow up with that in the future. But this nonfiction classic by Jules Verne was published in 1870. It takes you on an epic journey under the sea with the enigmatic Captain Nemo, Professor Aronnax, a French marine biologist, and there's a Canadian character who's a whaler and a harpooner called Ned Land in the book. The trio explore everything from coral reefs to Antarctica to underwater kelp forests, even the fictional lost city of Atlantis. So even though it was written in 1870, it's really a timeless work. It blends exploration and science fiction. That was really well ahead of its time for when it was written, which is kind of cool to read it now and kind of think about when it was written and the sort of things that are described in the book from a technology point of view. And it really should capture the imagination of anyone. You could be a young reader, an adult, a new or experienced diver alike. So it's a nonfiction book. But it's really about diving and exploring and science fiction. So I think it's a lot of fun to read. The really nice thing about it, if you go to Audible, it's actually free with a 30-day trial. Or you can actually, I think Amazon has it as an ebook for like 99 cents. And if you really want a paperback, they're usually like between 10 and 15 bucks, either online or from your local bookseller. So pretty easily accessible.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. You can always get one book for free from Audible as long as you have a new email account. But that's all I'll say about that.
Has anybody here read that book?
You know what? Strangely, I have not.
I read that book like back in the. I'm aging myself so poorly now. I feel like it's like so back in the day, and like it seems like such a nostalgic book for me. It was like one of those books that, and this is slightly off topic, but that there was like for like a kids edition of like a classic. So like the Red Badge of Courage and like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but like for kids, I guess, or for like younger, not like teenager, but I remember reading that book, and that just seems like such a nostalgic memory for me. I need to go pick it up. I need to go grab it.
Super cheap on Audible too, even if you don't have like a monthly account. I just looked, $5 Canadian. It's
worth
really
it.
good deal.
Yep.
Definitely worth it. What else is worth it? Following April's safety tips.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna dive in here and
dive in.
give you guys a safety tip. Do you guys? There's a show called This Is Us, which I'm a big fan of, and the one actor on that show, Chris Sullivan, he said in an interview, every single episode he tries to say "This Is Us." And the director keeps calling cut because that's like my goal on this show every week is to say dive in.
Nice little Easter egg for the listeners from now on.
Every episode, hear me say dive in.
If you send us the timestamp with when April says dive in, we'll send you.
Yeah, I'll send you a sticker. It might not be a dive in the podcast sticker, but it will be some sticker.
Some sticker, because we want to do some princess stickers for all we know. But
I just got 200 Frozen stickers today, so it may be a Frozen sticker.
I think Lachlan has about 500 Paw Patrol stickers.
Yes.
So if you want one of 500 Paw Patrol stickers, send us the timestamp for when April says dive in.
There you go. So my safety tip this week, is to take your rescue course. And if you've already taken it, actually remember what you learned in that course. I think all too often we get a little rusty on our rescue skills. And I think, that's something that's really important to practice and really important to stay up to date on, something really important to review. It's easy enough to just YouTube that, just PADI rescue drills, and they'll go over all of that for you. But, if you're actually in the scenario, it's nice to remember how to tow someone, how to do your rescue breaths, how to do CPR. Also, making sure all of your first aid courses are up to date. I know a lot of people let those expire without refreshing them. And it is good, and things change. So definitely staying up to date, practicing, and staying current with your rescue drills is a big one. Do you guys have anything to add there with just rescue? I know we're all instructors and we teach rescue courses, so teaching these rescue drills.
In the freediving course, the basic freediver courses have start off on a safety basis. In the club, we practice drills regularly, either in the pool or the ocean. And I think that should also apply to scuba. Like if you're a regular diver, or especially if you're not a regular diver, I think practicing drills from time to time is probably just as valuable as knowing, how you set up your gear or proper configuration and good trim. And if anything, that's kind of the skills that you're going to want to keep sharp all around.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I can speak from experience because I teach a lot of our dive master, and I'm a master instructor, so I take part in our IDCs a lot as well. And the thing that the candidates always have problems with is that rescue scenario. So if you haven't done a dive master course, if you haven't done a instructor, or even your rescue course, the rescue scenario I'm talking about is where you bring somebody up from underwater. You go through this routine of checking for breathing, taking their mask, the regulator off, before that establishing buoyancy, and removing their gear while swimming and removing them from the water. So I think there should be, I don't know if it maybe needs to be taught differently or something, like the rescue course needs to be revised to like allow people to retain that better, but I definitely think people need to be practicing that afterwards, because the amount of people that show up for a dive master course who literally you can tell that they haven't thought about this since day one of their rescue course. It's well,
if you think about it, right, the skills that you learn on a course are really the ones you use all the time, right? Setting up your gear, putting a regulator in, like configuring your gear properly, and like clipping in, doing your buddy review. But rescue skills are the one thing you don't practice, right? Because you tend to leave those for when you need them. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not surprising that those go by the wayside pretty quickly.
The rescue course was absolutely my favorite course that I've ever taken through PADI. Short of like the DM course was a lot of fun. The IDC was tons of stress, but a lot of fun. Like my rescue course was by far my favorite. And I tell people that all the time. And I cannot tell you that, like, I'm a huge fan of like preparing for any possibility, like in the future. Either buying gear or like taking courses. Like if you're going to do your rescue course and you have like some sort of thought that you may become a professional, really pay attention to the rescue course, because I don't know how many times I've done that rescue scenario that Justin has mentioned of the, like
1,000,
count
1,000,
mask off and breath, and then swim 1,000, 2 1,000, unclip the beast and breath. Like I cannot tell you how many times I've done that. And it's just drilled in over time, either from like the DM course, the rescue course, the IDC, like, and by the time you hit like a professional as an instructor, that needs to just be drilled into you, and there's no room for error there. So I would highly recommend anybody take the rescue course, and I think more times than not, dive shops will offer a rescue refresher.
Yes.
To people. And I mean, why not? Why not, brush up on some of the most important skills that you'll ever learn?
Or I mean, even volunteering to be a victim on a rescue course. We're always looking for victims. And that's a really good way. I mean, you can always jump in and ask to practice a rescue scenario, and even
absolutely.
shadowing all of that is really, really good experience. And I know as an instructor, I'm sure all of you can relate, but I've definitely been in scenarios where I've had to rescue people. So being up to date on that kind of stuff. And I think, like we've said in past episodes, and I know you guys were talking about this last week with Will, where he said his Discover Scuba student like ripped off her mask. These are all things that like you hear about in your rescue course and you don't necessarily like imagine are really going to happen, and then they happen. I know, like I was teaching an advanced course and I went underwater, and this girl, she starts like literally twirling in circles, rips her mask off, tears her regulator out of her mouth, then starts reaching for my mask. And like these are scenarios that you literally hear about in your rescue course, but you're like, no, someone wouldn't do that.
There's a reason why they're in there.
Oh, for sure. There's the reason they're in there is because they've happened before.
They literally happen. You don't think they're going to happen, but they happen. So knowing what to do in those scenarios is crucial. And if I didn't have proper training, maybe I wouldn't have handled that situation as well as I did. But I think just in general, staying up to date on rescue, like practice and being prepared for those kind of things is super, super important.
Yeah, the other thing that is making me think about is whenever I dive with somebody new, this is more lately in freediving because it's been what I've been doing more of lately, but I generally tend to try to feel out what the other diver is like, in terms of how responsible they are and, what are they going to be like on the water? Are they confident or not? But one of those things, and there's no script and there's no specific question you ask, but you're really trying to assess whether they're going to be able to like function in a scenario where maybe they need to rescue you, right? Ultimately, when you're diving with a new person that's your buddy, part of that is that you're entrusting them with your life if something happens, right? So being confident that they know how to rescue you, I think that's also kind of key.
Yeah, instructors aren't invincible as much as we like to think we are.
I think in a open water, it would be really cool if they actually incorporated a bit of a rescue like section. I know in the free diving course there's a rescue section, and I remember when me and Justin did our free diving course, there was the rescue section and he tried to drown me because he rolled over on top of me the wrong way.
What? No, I'm sure that didn't happen.
All of a sudden we can edit podcasts, huh?
It was like grab her shoulders and roll to the right, and then just rolls to the left. And just
no, stage right.
My entire back and just like pushes me under the water.
I'm always messing up camera left and stage left.
Yeah, stage left.
But no, I think if Patty's like open water course had a rescue factor, that could actually be super beneficial, because most people actually aren't even getting to those rescue scenarios until they get to their rescue course, which for a lot of people, it's like 30, 40 dives in. And I'm sure way before that you could benefit from knowing some rescues.
Absolutely. I mean, if it pays off once, that's worth the cost of the course, or like the time spent for me. If you rescue one person with what you learned in that course, worth it.
And there's times too when, I could easily surface, a wave hits me, I hit my head on a rock. I'm an instructor, I'm a good diver, but there's things that happen. And, I might need to be rescued. So to Nick Winkler's point of just like, you want to know your buddy could potentially rescue you. Like, you're never too good to be rescued, I guess is what I'm really trying to say.
Yeah. And I'm sure we could do an entire episode on what should be included in the open water course. Yeah. Scuba diving went from like you take one course and that's the only course you ever took. And so you learned rescue, you learned advanced techniques, you learned all that stuff all in your, course. And that's why it took, 6 months, and like there was drill instructors teaching it, and, that
to be fair,
stuff.
they threw gear at the bottom of the pool and told you to go assemble it back in the day.
My mom had to do that.
that is classic open water training right there.
Yeah, so I mean, there's there's probably good reasons that it's separated to where it is, but I definitely agree that you can never go wrong with safety techniques. No. But you know what else I can never go wrong with?
What's that?
April's social media tip.
Ooh, Ooh, my social media follow of the week. Well, let's just dive on into that and see what.
Free sticker. You're
Sending
getting a
myself a sticker.
Be prepared for 1,000 emails this week, Justin, and hundreds of dollars in shipping costs.
For a half-cent sticker.
My social media follow this week is another local guy. I know I'm in Ontario now, but I still refer to as Nova Scotia as local. And that's Rob McQuarrie. Rob McQuarrie is a big free diver. He also owns Shaw's Landing, which is an awesome restaurant and my favorite lobster roll of all time. So
best lobster roll in the province.
It's fantastic. And also an awesome place. Me and Nick Fisher have enjoyed that patio after many dives.
Absolutely.
But he is awesome, and he posts some really cool photos. His Instagram is rob.mcquarrie. And one thing I find super, super adorable is he has 2 little girls, and he posts like little Instagram videos and pictures of them like learning to snorkel and learning to free dive, and they're just like little girls, like I think they're like 3 years old. So it's I just think that's like amazing and so cute. So that's my social media follow this week.
There's videos of him from this summer this winter when they were in Costa Rica, and is doing short free dives, shallow free dives with his 6-year-old daughter or 5-year-old daughter on his back, and
little.
She's doing breath holds, and man, I wish my daughter could do that. Rob makes me feel like a slacker as a parent sometimes.
Don't let Susan listen to this episode.
Yeah.
I think I'm safe so far. My son is 1, so I think I got a few
minute.
Yeah,
it's never too early for that dry suit.
I'll get him caught up. I can probably tuck him into my dry suit.
Yeah, there you go.
I think we have to edit. I think we have to edit this out, or else CFS is going to come.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for all of that. April, thank you for those excellent tips, both social media and safety. That does it for this week's episode. I'd like to thank my co-host, April. It was good having you back. I felt normal again.
Yeah, I was really happy to be back. I do have one question for you, though, Justin.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of weeks ago, last time I was on here, you talked about your frogs. Did you end up getting a 3rd frog yet?
I got a 3rd frog.
And what's that?
We call him Baby Ray.
Baby Ray! Yay! That makes me so happy.
Yeah, so now we've got a frog for every co-host of the podcast.
That's awesome! Wow, that made my day.
And well, I'm glad I could make your day. Nick Fisher, you made my day by being here tonight.
Oh well, it's always a pleasure to be here, and I hope that Frog is doing well as well.
Yeah. Winks the frog is also doing well. Thanks for being here tonight, Nick.
It's good to hear. Thanks for having me.
All right.
You're keeping your frogs social, unlike the aquarium fish, right?
Yes, my frogs get way too much attention. They are not. They're not having any issues.
Can you actually tell them apart or no?
Yeah, actually.
So you know which one's Baby Ray?
I do, because it's the newest one, and it's very small compared to the other 2.
At what point do we?
It's kind of legit.
At what point do we make At what point do we make Instagram pages for all of them?
Maybe for the whole tank. I don't know about each frog.
Can you post a photo of the frogs on the Dive In Podcast Instagram so our listeners can see the frog?
Side by sides with each of the hosts?
Yeah, that's actually awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What did I just get myself into?
Speaking of, we still need a profile for Nick Fisher on our Instagram.
Yeah, for some reason that's not on there. So we'll get both of those things done this week because we're slackers on the Instagram.
Side by side and Nick Fisher's.
Nick Fisher first.
I think
those can be the same thing. The picture of the frog could be my thing.
Oh, okay. No. We need a legit one so everybody knows who we're dealing with here. And
big professional, phenomenal. So he deserves to be shown.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The frog we're talking about, right?
Yes. Not you.
Okay, yeah, that's great. All right, good. I thought so.
Justin wants to just close the show now.
I'm just staring at the sentence on my script.
It's the monthly recording time is vanishing like honey.
All right. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Dive In the Podcast. You can email us at divein.thepodcast@gmail.com. You can send us a voicemail on our website, www.diveinthepodcast.com. You can find me at iDiveOK. Nick Winkler is at Nicolas Winkler Photography. Nick Fisher is at Scuba406. And April is at April Weickert. You can find links for everything we mentioned here today on the episode show notes, and you can also find it on our website, diveinthepodcast.com. We'll see you next Monday when we chat with Gabrielle DeVoe about zero waste living, and as we gear up for Oceans Week coming up the following week after that. This episode of Dive in the Podcast was brought to you by our sponsor, Torpedo Rays Scuba. Head on over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you for listening.